What unanswered questions do the Utah Utes still need to solve before they take on the UCLA Bruins? We're diving into it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. It's your first time tuning into our show. Make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, we talk about the biggest questions that the Utah Utes still need to find and solve answers to before the 2025 season. Also, Ross Dellenger joins Locked On Utes to discuss the future of college athletics and the future of Utah athletics in their place in an ever-changing collegiate sports landscape. And then we'll also talk about all the pro Utes who showed out in week 1 of the NFL preseason. But first, what questions does Utah football still need to solve? They have solved a few. I want to give them credit for that, right? But this is a team that still has more issues to solve. They've solved, hey, who's cornerback 3? Who are the top 8 receivers? Those are some of the things that this team has solved, but they still have several positions that they need to get figured out. Ones that we've already talked about this week that I'm not going to discuss here because I've done full shows on them. QB2, we've already talked about that. Like, who's it going to be in QB2? Like, what is Nate Johnson's role on this team going to be? The dual running back situation is another one. Like, is it going to be Nicoire Rogers and Wayshawn Parker equally? Is it going to be more Wayshawn? We've talked about that already this week. So I want to talk about the other positional needs and issues that we haven't gotten a chance to dive into yet. Starting with what I think is the biggest thing this team needs to figure out right now. Who are going to be the starters and the depth along the defensive line? I feel like Logan Fano, the BYU transfer from a couple of years ago, has now been at Utah for a few seasons and was a starter last year and was solid, but could definitely get better. He was coming off a major injury, so I do expect a big year this year. Aliki Vaimahi, who has long been a veteran backup defensive tackle for Utah. I think he'll start this year. Dallas Vakalahi emerged really in the second half of the season as a true freshman, so I assume he'll be the other starting defensive tackle. But on that other defensive end side, I really don't know right now. John Henry Daly was a guy who generated a lot of buzz at Big 12 Media Days, so I think that that's a guy who could very likely be that defensive end opposite Fano. You're also looking at Paul Fitzgerald, who had 8 sacks at Utah State a couple years ago and then only played a little bit this most recent season. But Lance Holtzclaw from Washington, a transfer, a veteran there. Then you get Jackson Jones, a high recruit who went to Oregon, didn't do a lot there. So there's lots of intriguing options at the defensive end spot. And that's not mentioning like even a Cash Dillon, right? Maybe he can burst onto the scene as well too, right? So there's lots of options there at Utah for defensive end. But when you lose Van Fillinger and Connor O'Toole, you have a lot to replace there. And this is a Utah team that needs to generate more edge pressure this season. I think they have the buys to potentially do it, but they have to figure out who exactly it's going to be. I do think it will be John Henry Daly, just based on all the chatter that we have heard recently about his performance, but hasn't been locked in yet. So that's something this team has to figure out. Along the defensive line, as I said, I feel like I know the top 2 guys. Jonah Laea, maybe the next guy, but is the third guy going to be Pupu? Is it going to be Carson Kafusi, who comes in there as well? So there's lots of guys it could be for Utah, the defensive tackle spot, but a lot of them are young and inexperienced too. So how is that position going to solve itself? You need to figure out the depth chart, and I'm sure Utah has. They're just kind of keeping it close to the vest because that's a position that they need a lot of reps in spring ball to get ready. We've heard the offensive line looks really good. I think a majority of that is because the offensive line is really good, but I do have my slight concerns that it's also because that Utah's defensive line is not having a great fall camp so far too. So that's the biggest one to me, defensive line. I didn't have wide receiver as the biggest one because we know who the top 8 are at least, but they got to figure out the top 3. I said before that I think the Notre Dame and Cal transfer wide receiver Tobias Merriweather will be wide receiver 1, 200 pounds, 6'5", just can't teach and coach that. And it feels like he is maximizing his potential, which he hasn't always been able to do throughout his collegiate career. Then you look opposite of him. I look at Larry Simmons as a guy who's generated a lot of buzz already. Devin Dampier even said he looked really good in the scrimmage. The Southern Miss receiver came over as well as a guy who's been able to produce. Let's not forget, this is a Utah team that lost Zacharias Williams after the spring game, and we thought he was going to be wide receiver 1. So you're able to recoup with a guy in Tobias Merriweather, who we hope is going to be even better than maybe a Williams was, but that was still a significant loss for this Utah team. outside of those guys, right? Who's in the slot? I still think it's going to be Ryan Davis, over 700 yards at New Mexico and Jason Beck's offense, Utah's new offensive coordinator, and now with Devin Dampier once again. But you still got guys like a Creed Whitmore, former Mississippi State transfer, who could factor into things at the slot, right? You got other guys that could still be options on the outside. Darren Zipper, I think, is going to see a lot of time. Smith Snowden mentioned him having a big season in his opinion. Luca Caldarella is the longest tenured receiver in this wide receiver room. It's a new offense, but does he get his way out on the field? Man, Carvalho made some plays in the spring game. Glover's a guy we've heard about too. So there's lots of guys for Utah that could step up, but not a lot of proven commodities. And you could say the same thing mostly about the tight end. I guess Otto T is proven in a sense. He had 500 yards at Utah State, but we haven't seen what he can do at tight end. So I'm curious to see what his role will be. I still think he gets the most snaps out there because of that large catch radius and just how much college football experience he has under his belt. But outside of Tia, right, Hunter Andrews is a guy that people were buzzing about. Can he make another position change after coming in as a linebacker, then becoming a running back, now a tight end? Is he a guy that's going to see a lot of time? Dallin Bentley being the veteran, the best blocker. And we've also just heard the tight end's not the biggest priority on this offense. Also, I should mention Smith Snowden and Lander Barton. We still don't know how much of them we'll see on offense. That's something that Utah has to determine too, right? And as for any other things that really stand out to me that this team still needs to figure out, I'd also add in special teams, right? Is Dylan Curtis the high recruit? Is he going to be this team's starting kicker? He comes from Murray, was a very highly touted kicker for accuracy-wise at Murray High School. Can he keep that up at Utah? He hit the long field goal in practice the other day from 60-plus yards, but that's a lot of pressure on a true freshman for a team that has Big 12 and CFP aspirations. So we know who the punter is going to be, but biggest thing is just who's going to make your field goals right now after you lost a guy in Cole Becker who was really solid for Utah last season too. And I think the last question that Utah will need to solve, I feel confident that he will be good, but there is still the question like, hey, is Devin Dampier ready for P4 football week in and week out? We don't technically get our answer to that early because he gets UCLA once, but then he gets to see Cal Poly and then Wyoming. But we're going to figure out pretty quick if Devin Dampier is ready for this level of football, because we've talked about on the show, seen G5 QBs who come over to Utah or not to Utah. We've seen G5 QBs come up to the P4 level and struggle, and they don't end up even being the starter. I don't think Devin Dampier will be that. I think he's going to have an awesome season, but because he hasn't done it against the best of the best, that being P4 competition, there are question marks there. So that's the other question that Utah has to get figured out, and they know he's QB1, so they won't be able to figure it out if he is the guy who's going to take them to the guy who's going to help them meet those lofty expectations and goals and what could be Kyle Whittingham's last season, which I guess is also a question too, is Kyle Whittingham's last year, but Kyle Whittingham's going to do everything in his power not to let that get out. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, if this will indeed be Kyle Whittingham's last year, so make sure you tune in to tomorrow's Locked On Utes. But first, Ross Dellenger was kind enough to join me at Big 12 Media Days and talk about the ever-evolving landscape of college sports and also how Utah is going to be impacted by those changes. We'll be talking to Ross in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Future Days, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on the NFL season predictions, so whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before Week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. For me, MVP this season, I got a feeling that Patrick Mahomes is actually going to come roaring back for the title. I think the Chiefs are better on the offensive line. I think they upgraded those receiving core. So for me, I'm going to say Mahomes MVP as we sit here right now. But if you want to get in on the action, you can visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports, kind enough to sit down with me now and talk about the future of college football. And Ross, that's my first genuine question, is just what does the future of this sport look like? And I know it's not an easy question to answer right now.
No, it's not. We don't know what the next day will bring, right? Let alone the next month or year. As they say, one thing consistent about college sports is you can count on it changing. That's about the only thing you can count on it doing. So it's it's a influx time right now with athlete compensation and the new rev share rules and all that stuff, man. And I would expect that it will continue to change and evolve. And we've seen it evolve the last few years, and it'll keep evolving.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. Like you said, going to continue to change. Do you feel like a school like Utah, and even you could say just in the Big 12, are they set up to succeed right now? Or do you think it's going to be hard for the Big 12 to, Brett Yormark yesterday was talking about he wants to get 2 teams into the college football playoff. That does feel like a tall mountain to climb.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the new enforcement entity, the clearinghouse, which has to approve all these revenue share contracts with player, or has to approve third-party NIL deals with players. If the clearinghouse of this enforcement entity is strict, right, and denies a lot of these deals, I think everybody it'll be more of an even playing field to benefit schools in the Big 12 that might not have the resources, the outside third-party resources of the SEC and Big 10, and even some of the schools in the ACC. So they really need the Big 12 and ACC. We're shooting live here. Deion Sanders is yelling and screaming on the podium. But, I think it benefits the Big 12 and the ACC if the clearinghouse and the enforcement staff enforces the way we've been led to believe they will, which is denying a lot of booster deals. Because if they don't enforce strictly, and I think the Big 10 and SEC that probably has more resources, more boosters, more booster support in a lot of ways, it'll make it harder, for there to be some kind of even playing field. So if you're a Big 12 and ACC fan, you really, in a way, are rooting for more enforcement. It's the better.
How they do enforce this, because so many teams have done probably something that they would rather not have that get out. So that if you accuse someone, do they look into yours? I mean, but do you feel like this is something that's going to be enforced? Do you feel like we are going to see, Sonny Dykes was up there earlier talking about he wants a level playing field. Do you feel like we're going to get that? And I mean, in some ways you can argue we've almost never had that in college football. So just do you think we're ever going to get that level playing field and have it enforced?
Yeah, the one thing about college athletics is, there are always have been tiers. You've always had the haves and the have-nots, as they like to say, and I think that will probably always stay. They'll stay the same. I don't know that that's going to really change drastically. We're probably going to see the clearinghouse trigger lawsuits when they start potentially rejecting some of these booster deals, and we could see a lawsuit potentially, shutting down the enforcement entity, and that would really obviously prohibit what Sonny and others have talked about sort of leveling the playing field. And so again, I go back. I think to level the playing field, you do have to have enforcement. We just don't know. It's too early to know. It's only 3 weeks into the clearinghouse, and right now there's a little bit of a pause, kind of a holdup right now with some of the deals. They're under review, and they've been under review now for a couple of weeks. And I think part of that is because the plaintiff lawyers in the House case are still involved, and they get to approve, and they have authority over some of what they call the anti-circumvention rules. And these rules are a list of rules that need to be approved by the plaintiff lawyers. And the plaintiff lawyers and the college athletic administrators are going back and forth and negotiating over these rules and how strict they can be, or how lenient they can be. And that's kind of what's happening right now. So it's too early to say what this will look like.
One thing that I am curious, though, is revenue sharing and how teams are going to go about divvying up that revenue. I've talked for Utah before. I'd be down if they went up to as high as even maybe 16% of that, or 16 million of the 20 million going to football. It's just obviously it's the moneymaker, what drives the mothership that is a college athletic program. But how do you think most teams are going to use that revenue sharing? And how does Title IX factor in this too?
Yeah, the rev share is obviously up to the school's discretion. They can share that $20.5 million cap, any way they please. And I think for the most part, schools are sharing about 70 to 75% with their football team, and about 10 to 15% with their men's basketball, 5% with women's basketball, and about 5% roughly to kind of everything else. So I think you'll see that's kind of the structure that you'll see under the current cap right now. But, there's some schools that are probably going to share a little more, maybe 20-25% with their men's basketball. Kansas is a good example of that, probably Duke too, that they're probably going to share more because, they have a rich history of success in that sport. And that's one of the things when you look at schools that don't have football programs and can invest a lot on basketball. For instance, Villanova, and Villanova doesn't have football, but it's FCS, so it's lower resource. But Grand Canyon, which is the new Mountain West school, they don't have football at all. So they have a good deal of money, I believe. So you can imagine that they're going to invest more heavily and probably have a bigger rev share pool than even a lot of the power conferences for their men's basketball team. So, and that's where the power leagues, in order to compete with them, are going to have to find true NIL they can get through the clearinghouse. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now, is whether it's using multimedia rights partners or apparel brands or other different corporate sponsors, to instead of diverting money from the athletic department to the roster, to do deals with the roster, these big businesses and brands, so that they can go above the cap.
College sports are a wild place right now, especially college football, trying to track all the spending, NIL, and everything. If you guys want to try and keep it straight, make sure you guys give Ross a follow on X and look at all his work at Yahoo Sports. Ross, thank you again so much for coming on. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Wayfair. As the summer winds down, there's something nice about getting back into a routine you love. And Wayfair makes it easy to set yourself up for the season ahead. From bedding and lines to storage solutions for every room, Wayfair is your one-stop shop for refreshing your home. With Wayfair, it's so convenient to find exactly what I need all in one place and at a price that fits my budget. How much of a hassle can it be constantly scrolling and going to store after store to try and find everything? Well, that's what's nice about Wayfair. They have everything you need in one place. This is the perfect time to get your home ready, whether that's organizing, upgrading your workspace, or making weeknight dinners easier. Get organized and refreshed and back to your routine for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, huge thanks to Ross Dellenger for joining me again at Big 12 Media Days, and he's a guy who does a great job covering the present Utes that will soon go on to the pros. Speaking of pro Utes, there are over 30 Utah football players in the NFL, a lot of them in action during the NFL preseason week 1. So what were they able to do? Well, Corene Reed had one of the highlight plays. He was able to get a pick and had 2 tackles as well for the Denver Broncos, which was great to see. Connor O'Toole was also an absolute maniac for the Seahawks. He had a sack, 3 tackles, and 3 QB hits too. Injuries really plagued O'Toole at Utah. I think he's got a chance to be a difference maker for Seattle. They gave him a nice undrafted free agent contract, help him succeed at the next level. Also, Thomas Yasmin got signed by the Chargers. He was one of their highest graded PFF players from this past game, and he just signed there recently too. Yasmin's a guy, it's always been injuries with him. If he can stay healthy, that size, that speed, look out, even NFL defenses. He made defenders look silly at USC, and I think he's got a chance to be a difference maker for Denver if he can just stay healthy. Samaya Vaughn's had a nice camp up in Minnesota. He had 4 tackles versus the Texans, 2, and a pass defended. Junior Tafuna also played in that game, but he was playing for the Houston Texans. Tafuna, a guy that we thought would have a chance to go drafted, but ended up going undrafted. He had 3 tackles, including a TFL against Minnesota. A pair of Utah safeties were in action. Julian Blackman and Terrell Burgess for the Saints each had a tackle in that game. Also, Devon Vele played for the Denver Broncos. He had played a pretty big role last year, so weren't sure how much we'd get to see of him, but he did have 1 reception for 6 yards in their preseason opener. Speaking of receiving yards, how about Dorian Singer? He was second on the Jacksonville Jaguars in receiving yards. He had 3 catches for 30 yards in total, so really loved watching Singer show out in Jacksonville. He's another guy, had he been able to go through the draft process normally and had he had better quarterback play, 700 yards with that quarterback situation in Salt Lake City last year is incredibly impressive. So I'm very much glad that he is getting the opportunity he deserves and hopefully becomes one of Trevor Lawrence's favorite targets. Miles Battle, former Ole Miss corner who then came to Utah, is also in action for New England. He had 2 tackles and pass deflected as well. Jonah Ellis was in action for the Denver Broncos. He had a tackle and a QB hit. He's a guy that I feel like will take an even bigger role in year 2 with the Broncos. You also have Nephi Sewell, who had 2 tackles in his game with the Saints. Sione Vaki is hurt, but he is beginning to practice now. And how about Bradley Anai? He was able to cause a pressure in the 49ers game, but he's a guy who led the UFL with 23% pass rush win rate, 5 sacks, top 5 in pressures with 33 in the UFL. So love that Anai is getting another crack in the league. And we didn't even mention Leki Fotu, Brain Daniels, Satawa Laumea. There are so many Utah football players in the NFL, and it's just something that's great for Utah. You also got some stars, right? Jalen Johnson at cornerback. He's probably the current best Ute in the NFL. Zach Moss has put together some really nice years. Tyler Huntley played well for the Browns in the second half after they turned it over from Shedeur Sanders, who also looked solid in his NFL debut, former Big 12 quarterback. Dalton Kincaid also has a chance to have a big year with the Buffalo Bills. Last year, a little bit of a disappointment. I expect to see Kincaid be among the best tight ends in the league this season. Cole Bishop on the defensive side does a really good job over there as well. So there are just so many guys. Garrett Bowles, offensive tackle for the Denver Broncos. I mean, how many guys does this Utah team have in the NFL, which is just obviously massive for Utah, because this is a Utah team that can use that as a recruiting tool and say, hey, this is what these guys were able to do at the collegiate level, and now look at what they're going on to do at the NFL level. You want to get to the pros, you want to have a chance to win, get your skills developed, and have a chance to play early, come to Utah football. Spencer Fano is going to be the poster child for that next year. Caleb Lomu too. High recruits came to Utah, got to play early, had their skills developed, became elite, and now are among the best in college football and soon could be among the best offensive linemen in the NFL. So love the position that this Utah football team is in. They've produced more NFL draft picks than any Big 12 team over the past 11 years. And the ceiling is only looking like it's going to trend up with, I think, Lander Barton, both offensive tackles we mentioned, Teo Johnson. I think Utah easily has 4 guys, if not more, drafted this coming season. But really exciting time to have these pro Utes balling in the NFL. I can't wait to see what the seasons these guys have put together. Shout out Tim Patrick, too, as well, a Detroit Lions receiver, another guy who hadn't gotten a ton of preseason run because he's a veteran, but helped Detroit out a lot and had injuries not derailed some of his last couple of years. He played last year some, but he had back-to-back years in Denver with season-ending injuries. Love that he's finally healthy and able to show what he can do. That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. Want to know from you guys. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What are the big questions Utah still needs to answer? How do you feel like Utah is set up for the future of college athletics? And what do you think just watching these pro Utes from the past weekend? Drop your thoughts and comments below. We'll be back with you on tomorrow's Locked On Utes. If you're in the market for a second listen every day, make sure you check out the portal where Brian Smith does a great job of running through all of the latest happening across college football, portal entries, signings, rumors. Find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast today. That's going to do it for Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow talking about if 2025 will indeed be Kyle Whittingham's final season up on the hill.